Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event in the series Poli-Talks, Get Informed Before Elections. This series is co-hosted by Kerem House and Israeli Politics Simplified. Kerem House is a community-focused organization based in Tel Aviv. Since the beginning of COVID, they have focused on organizing outdoor and virtual events aimed to empower and engage Olim and young professionals in the city. Israeli Politics Simplified is a Facebook page dedicated to bringing Anglos in Israel unbiased, easy to understand information about Israeli politics and the upcoming election. I'm Meira Lerner, creator of the Israeli Politics Simplified page, and I will be your host for this and upcoming events in this series. It's very easy to get confused and overwhelmed by the information overload that we see from the campaigns leading up to elections. We know that you, the voters, care about the issues and want to gain a better understanding of the political and election system and what the parties plan to do to meet your needs in the next government. This election is a truly important one, and our goal is to help you feel prepared and knowledgeable when you step into the voting booth next month. Our previous and upcoming events will include discussions with candidates from different parties, and the discussion will be held in a panel format. We have carefully crafted and selected questions for our candidates that really hit on some of the issues that affect most of us on a day-to-day basis. Most of our focus will be on those issues in particular. I'll be asking these questions to each candidate to ensure that we get answers on each topic from each party. And my guests will be asking follow-ups to ensure that we get a full answer and perspective. Joining me today for these questions is Marcy Yoselevsky. Marcy lives in Tel Aviv. She has a background in Jewish education, nonprofit management, and politics, and has been active both in the United States and Israel. Marcy is also a member of the Kerem House Committee and the hostess of Kerem Talks, a series of online interviews that took place during COVID. Joining us today is Rabbi Gilad Kariv. He is number 4 on the Labor Party's list for the Knesset. Rabbi Kariv is one of the foremost leaders of the Reform Judaism movement in Israel and around the Jewish world. He is a lawyer specializing in constitutional and administrative law and one of the most prominent voices in the public arena in the field of religious and state relations, promoting freedom of religion and conscience in Israel, the coexistence of Jews and Arabs, and furthering relations between Israel and diaspora Jewry. With that, it is my privilege to welcome Rabbi Gilad Kariv. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Shalom, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be with you.
Before we jump into our questions, do you want to take just a minute or two to tell us a little bit more about you and the Labor Party in more general terms?
So first, again, thank you for inviting me to this interview. I hope this discussion. I strongly believe that the community of English speaker Israelis is a leading community and a community that can contribute a lot to the Israeli political discourse. As one of the leaders of the reform movement in Israel, I deeply appreciate the dialogue between native Israelis and Israelis that are coming with a lot of experience from other countries, other democracies, and other Jewish settings. And I strongly believe that this community can contribute a lot to our ability to meet and face the current challenges we are dealing with. You know, as a member of the reform movement here in Israel, I'm usually being asked how come in many of our congregations you can still hear a heavy English or American accent, and my immediate response is, please keep in mind that Ben Gurion and Menachem Begin had a heavy Polish accent. Israel was built by people with heavy accents, and this is a source of strength and not something we need to cope with. So my name is Gilad. I'm 47 years old. I was born immediately after the Yom Kippur War. I grew up in Tel Aviv. I live today with my wife Noah and our 3 teenagers in the city of Givatayim. In the last 30 years, I'm deeply involved in the work of the Israeli Reform movement. I was ordained as one of its rabbis in 2003 here in Jerusalem in the Israeli campus of the Hebrew Union College. And in the last 10 years, I'm the head of the Israeli Reform movement, the president of the movement. Since I was quite young, during my high school years, I became to be quite active politically. Since I finished my military duty, I'm a member of the Labor Party. I have a very strong belief in the need to promote social democratic policies here in Israel. And I always found the Labor Party to be the party that represents my values and the values of my brothers and sisters in the progressive Israeli communities.
So then let's hear a little bit more about labor and your plans should you be in the upcoming Knesset. The COVID pandemic has created an unemployment crisis, the likes of which we've never seen before. Some career fields, for example, anything in tourism and hospitality industries, are completely altered. And though we're getting back to some of the normalcy, we're not quite all the way there yet. Can you tell us what labor's plan is to bring people back to work and open those industries up, and what your party's plan is to combat the massive shutdown and suffering of small businesses?
So I want to thank you for starting with a question related to the pandemic. I strongly believe that the current crisis crystallized many of the deep challenges we are facing in Western democracies in general, and here in Israel in particular. And it's clear that there are some unique challenges we face because of the pandemic, but usually those challenges didn't start a year ago. And they are deeply rooted in the political policies that guided our country before the pandemic, and the current situation only forces us to come with rapid solutions and to be more clear in regard to our agenda. And here we need to say that it is clear that in spite of its importance, the private market, the private sector cannot offer the solutions by itself. And without a very clear and direct involvement of the government in helping the job market, in helping the Israeli economy to restart itself, we will not be able to bring back hundreds of thousands of Israelis into the job market. Now, the Israeli government was very rapid in presenting a response to the crisis by asking the National Insurance Institution, Hamosad Lebituach Leumi, to use its reserves in order to pay the monthly payment of those people that left their work or were sent to what we call Halat, a leave of absence. And it is clear that right now we need to change the policy. And the government needs to help the employers to bring back employees. We need a national plan to support those employers that are bringing back employees. This is a model that is successfully being implemented in many European countries. Unfortunately, till now, the government didn't succeed to fix a plan, to present a plan that can be implemented immediately. And this is definitely something we're planning to do. This is one element. The other element has to do with using this critical moment in order to prepare the Israeli market to a new reality. And although our prime minister is suggesting that the pandemic is behind us, you know what our tradition says about profits after the destruction of the second temple. We don't believe in profits anymore. We believe in wise leaders. And I don't think that the pandemic is behind us. I don't think we finished to deal with the results of this terrible year. And we need to understand that we are entering a new reality. Even if we feel that we are back to the routine, we can meet our grandparents again. The markets are busy. We are all preparing towards Passover. This is a new world and a new reality. And definitely there are going to be tens of thousands of Israelis, if not hundreds of thousands of Israelis, that will not be able to go back to their businesses because they collapsed during the pandemic. Almost 100,000 Israeli small businesses collapsed during the pandemic during the last year. Unfortunately, again, the government basically did nothing in order to enable them to survive. But this is right now the situation. And one of the things we need to do is to present also a plan of young Israelis to identify a new occupation, to identify new opportunities in the
Okay, we are having a bit of a technical problem here. So in the meantime, for anyone who has just joined us, we are sitting with Rabbi Kariv from the Labor Party, and he is telling us about the labor's plans for small businesses since the COVID shutdowns and the effect that it's had. Rabbi Kariv, I know that you were in the middle of speaking, so if you are back with us, if we could just sum up in 1 minute, if possible, what your top priority plan is to address that particular topic of small businesses. Okay, I think we're still having some problems. So I just want to give Marcy also, she's with us, an opportunity to say hi, and she will be joining us on some of the questions as well.
Hi all, I'm Marcy Ozalewski. I'm here as a member of the Kerem House Committee and as someone who lives in Tel Aviv. Welcome back. And
all right, I think we have Rabbi Kariv back with us. Rabbi Kariv, are you there? Okay,
yes.
Great. So can we just in 1 minute just sum up the plans for small businesses?
So when it comes to the small businesses, the government, again, needs to offer direct support, financial support to those businesses that will restart themselves. It must include bringing back the employees or recruiting new workers. Unfortunately, Israel is now listed at the bottom of the OECD countries in the level of financial support we presented to small businesses, to independent businesses. And immediately after we are elected, and if we succeed to create a coalition of change, Koalitzia Shel Shinui, one of the things we need to do is to offer a real plan to support those small businesses based on both governmental grants and comfortable governmental loans to those small businesses. Again, we are heading towards elections, so we cannot refrain ourselves from talking about what we saw in the last 12 months. And again, aside to the major success with the vaccines, and I'm not ignoring it, the current government totally failed to offer the small businesses, among many other sectors, real help.
Great. So we are going to move on to the next topic now, which is also relevant to the economic issue, and I'm sure will have an impact on those who have lost their jobs and income, and that's housing. There's no secret that we have a major housing crisis in this country right now. Young families all over the country would like to buy homes, and that dream is made impossible by astronomical prices, limited options in central locations, and bureaucratic processes that are difficult to navigate. Despite programs like Meir L'Mishtaken, which have very specific requirements that many young home buyers don't meet, and more often than not don't win, there aren't very many affordable options for people to purchase homes. No less important, rent in many areas, especially more central locations, is incredibly high. What is Labor's plan to solve this, and how will you implement it?
Again, I strongly believe that in the end, the reality we face is the result of the policies we adopt. It's not a coincidence. This is a direct result of policies that were adopted by the different Israeli governments, mainly right-wing governments, in the last 3 decades. Now, look, the issue of housing crisis in Israel is unbelievable. 90% of the free lands in Israel are owned by the government. Basically, there is almost no private lands in Israel. This is the result of the successful Zionist philosophy that in such a small piece of land, in such a small country, it's good that the public, the government is holding most of the land resources, so we will be able to promote collective goals, national goals. And the fact that in a system that you have basically free public land, you do not succeed to lower the housing prices, this is crazy. There is no real reason for this situation. And the only explanation is that, again, the Israeli government took a decision to withdraw itself from this market and to leave it into the hands of the private sector. Now, again, I don't think that the Israeli government should build apartments directly. But the fact is that the government, instead of initiating housing projects across the country, with the involvement of the private sector, but mainly as a government initiative, leads to this situation. Now, there are those that suggest that this is because of the Israeli bureaucracy. It's not because of the Israeli bureaucracy. It's because the government is not working hard in order to build enough apartments. Now, the history of Zionism shows that when the government wants to do something, we can do it. Now, if private constructors do not want to build, okay, so we have enough governmental housing companies that will take the initiatives. Now, you need to add another element. One of the reasons to this crisis is the fact that the government is failing both to promote and also to regulate the renting market. Again, Israel is behind the vast majority of Western countries in offering not only housing solutions, but also renting solutions that are regulated by the authorities. And we are pushed to this situation that by definition, an Israeli family must buy an apartment. But the truth is that this is not the case in most Western countries. And if we had a sophisticated enough a renting market, if the government was involved in regulating the creation of renting market, in promoting projects, not for the sake of selling apartments, but rather renting apartments. Many Israeli families from the middle class and the lower class would have felt comfortable with investing their free income in other important needs of the family and not in buying an apartment. So we need to do two things. We need to build more apartments, either through the private sector or through a government initiative. And in that regard, Mechir HaMishtaken is a good idea. The only problem that this is the only idea that the government came with in the last 15 years. So you can't solve everything with Mechir LaMishtaken. You need Mechir LaMishtaken and you need 10 other governmental plans. Again, the private sector want to come in, wonderful, we welcome them. They don't want, we will not wait for them. We will build. There are enough public mechanisms to do it. I want to remind you all that in the beginning of the 90s, Israel welcomed almost 1 million new citizens. And when they came, they were not sent to live in tents like the newcomers in the 50s. The Israeli government understood that it is its duty to build hundreds of thousands of apartments, and it was done in 5, 6, 7 years. So if we face a national crisis in the housing market right now, why not to do the things that we did at the beginning of the 90s? And again, aside to that, we need to create from the scratch a sophisticated renting market in Israel that will lower the demand for buying apartments.
Right. So it's a little bit of a verge from that topic, but also within the space of what other people might need and where to invest the money and what's more outdated. And that's on the topic of cars. Cars are expensive, environmentally destructive, and in city centers, there's no parking. Furthermore, cities like Tel Aviv are phasing out parking spaces in favor of walkways, bike, and scooter lanes. What are your plans to make us less reliant on cars?
You know, it's interesting that that we can start all answers with the same opening remark. Look, Israel moved from a situation of, or moved from being one of the Western countries with the best strategic planning to be a country which is led and run and managed day by day. One of the mega problems that we have here in Israel is the lack of the governments and then also the civil service to plan ahead, to create strategic plans for the Israeli future. Now, again, it is not a coincidence. We have a government that is trying to weaken the civil service. We have a government which is obsessed with political survival. I ask all of you to remember the unbelievable fact that we don't have a national budget, not for 2021. We don't have a national budget for 2020. Now, according to the Israeli basic law of Taktiv HaMedida, the national budget, if you do not approve a budget in the Knesset, the only thing you can do is to use the previous budget month by month. By definition, when you don't update your budget, you can't start to do strategic moves. And that is why, in so many ways, even before the pandemic, and for pure political reasons and bad management, Israel is not able to push strategic moves anymore. One of the areas in which we definitely in the back rows of the Western countries is the environmental policies of the Israeli government and the lack of investment in relevant solutions in the arena of transportation, of energy, of many other fields. It is clear that in such a small country like Israel, any further investment in the private car, not industry, we don't have industry, but the fact that instead of building the infrastructure of sophisticated public transportation, we invest more and more in building roads to enable more and more cars to jam the country. This is crazy. This is crazy. Again, the fact that the average middle class Israeli family must have two cars in order to survive. That's the fact. Most middle class families in Israel will not be able to educate the children, to stay in touch with the Saba and Safta, to live decent life unless the two parents have cars. It's crazy. It's crazy. And the reason mainly is that we don't have a sophisticated public transportation infrastructure. In that regard, and this is definitely a philosophy and policy that goes against what you can hear today, for example, from Yamina and from Naftali Bennett's party and others. We don't think that we need to work hard to make cars less expensive. We don't want Israelis to buy more cars. Okay, definitely cars should be something that families can afford. Definitely we want families in Israel to have at least one car. If it's a family with children, we don't ignore the need. But the last thing we need right now to do is to enable families to have three private cars. On the contrary, what we need to do is to create a system of how to say, you'll excuse me that I'm not a native English
That's okay.
speaker.
I can help.
We need to create benefits for those Israelis and Israeli families that are willing to leave the car aside and to use the public transportation. We need to create a situation, I'm sorry to say it, that we are paying more for the private use of our car. If instead of doing a carpool in the morning, we choose to ride by ourselves to the workplace in our private car, then this is a problem we need to solve. Now, we don't need to go to the Scandinavian countries, the leading social democratic countries. Look at what is happening in the Bay Area in the US. All the public support for a more clever use of vehicles. It doesn't exist in Israel. And again, it doesn't exist because no one is working seriously on creating a strategic plan to achieve it. And definitely the Labour Party, as part of our environmental commitment, we are planning to invest a lot in public transportation infrastructures inside the cities and between the cities.
Okay, Marcy, do you have any quick follow-ups on this? Because I know that we don't have a lot of time.
Sure, I'll be quick on this one. As a Tel Aviv resident, it's very relevant. And I'm wondering if there are cities in particular that you look to, you started to mention San Francisco, models of policies, practices, what's happening. We're hardly the only ones struggling with this. Where do you look at solutions that might be relevant for us here?
So first of all, it's quite clear that in the big Israeli cities, metropolises, We need to promote solutions like the light rail in Jerusalem, the light rail in Tel Aviv. You understand that those strategic plans were created in the 70s and they are implemented now. It tells you something about the efficiency of our government. We need to duplicate and triple the efforts inside the cities and again between the cities in the different 3-4 metropolises in Israel, especially in the area of light rails, of subways, on massive transportation solutions. That's one element. A second element is we definitely need to bring Israelis to leave their cars either in the parking lots of their houses or at the entrances to the cities, and to offer good solutions of leave your car here and we'll take you to your workplace. Please remember that Tel Aviv is not Los Angeles. Okay, it is not a big city in geographical terms. Okay, it takes you 30 minutes to go from one side of Tel Aviv to the other side if you're using smart transportation solutions. So we need to take the private cars outside of city centers during the day. We need to promote the use of two wheels vehicles, bikes and electric bikes and motorcycles. We need to encourage Israelis to walk more. Again, this is not London. 75% of the days are here without rain. Again, all the solutions are out there. You know, the Moach Yehudi, the Jewish mind, doesn't need to come with all the solutions. I can share with you a secret that there are good solutions in other places, right? And most European countries.
The Jewish mind, though, I do want to move on to education. So if we can just wrap it up in one final word. We're ready to move on. Okay. We have a lot of parents that are tuning in for this event, and many of them are concerned about our current education system. Over the years, there have been many plans to change how education is approached in this country. We'd love to address a few issues in particular and hear what the party's plans are. First, the major disparity between school vacation days and workforce vacation. This in particular puts a huge strain on working parents and drives up expenses for childcare. And the second point is curriculum and what it is that we are teaching our children. Some feel that more curriculum decisions should be made by school principals, and that curriculum and education focus should move away from learning for tests and more towards experiential learning, life skills, and general knowledge. What is the Labor Party's stance on these issues in particular? And what is the plan to implement any changes you'd like to see made?
So I'll start by saying that the Labour Party is the only party in Israel that presented a plan to promote equality in family life. It's part of our sensitivity towards gender issues. We are the only party led by a woman leader. It's amazing and disappointing that among the 13 parties that will be represented in the next Knesset, probably only one is led by a woman. It's the only list that have full gender equality among its candidates. By definition, it's a rich-rach list. A woman, a man, a woman, a man. And that's the way we need to promote gender equality in Israeli politics. It will not happen if we're not doing something to fix the current situation. Now, in this plan that was presented by Merav Michaeli, one of the items is to close the gap between the parents' vacations and the number of vacation days in the schools. It will not happen if we are not working with the teacher unions. We have right now a government that is fighting with the unions instead of building a dialogue and working together. And I need to say, after this year most teachers in Israel are saints. I'm not saying all of them, but most of them, believe me, are saints, and there is no reason
I've had
why
3
to tell
children through this pandemic myself, so
yes.
I agree.
So there is no need to tell them, you need to give up your rights, okay? Instead of let's try to reshape together the working arrangements of teachers and principal. But definitely we need to minimize the gap. I strongly believe that we need to come from the two directions. I think that in modern labor market, it is not a good place to be to give your employee only 1 day of leave per month. It's not smart. Israelis are working much more hours than their other Western fellows. We need to how to say to narrow the working hours in Israel, not in a dramatic way. I don't suggest to go to the French model or to the Spanish model, but there is no reason why the labor week in Israel will be between 40 to 42 hours. It's part of the package. Second, you talked about the curriculum. You didn't ask about it, but I want us all to remember that a third of all the first graders in Israel don't study any core curriculum because they are part of the ultra-Orthodox independent schooling system, which is 100% financially supported by the government. Okay? So before we are talking about modifying the core curriculum of the non-ultra-Orthodox schools, please keep in mind, okay, that a third of all young Israelis don't get the necessary tools in order to support themselves as grown-ups and their families and to contribute to the Israeli economy and to the Israeli society. It's against the legislated law in Israel. This is another result of the unholy covenant between Netanyahu and the ultra-Orthodox parties. This is something we need to change. Again, not like maybe Lieberman's suggestions. We don't think that we need to go like this against the ultra-Orthodox community. It's part of the Israeli society. We always need to prefer a dialogue over using sticks, but when you do not signal the political leadership of the ultra-Orthodox community that you mean business, that it cannot continue to be like this, there is no reason why they will come and suggest, you know what, we agree with you, we'll start to teach core curriculum. Now, in regard to the other parts of the school system, look, I'm not against giving more autonomy to the local educational authorities and to the principals. Definitely, we need to support and to promote new ideas, new initiatives. We want teachers and principals to be creative. I strongly believe that parents can contribute a lot to the schools, communities. Definitely the American model of more involvement of parents' boards, of local educational committees should be something that we welcome. At the same time, we need to guard the public nature of the education system in Israel. I don't want to be, or I don't want to adopt the American reality or most of the European communities that push the stronger families to choose private education without a very strong, well-established public school system that in the end meets the needs of 95% of Israeli students. We will never be able to promote a more egalitarian situation in the Israeli society and to close the gaps between the periphery and central Israel. So again, when we are talking about autonomy, we need to make sure that those forces in Israel that are promoting the privatization of the education system, and unfortunately we have those forces in the Israeli politics, we need to find the right balance between educational autonomy. Look, I'm a Reform Jew. I'm raising my 3 kids in a regular secular Israeli school because I don't have a good public educational solution that will enable my kids to practice their religious faith, a liberal, egalitarian Jewish religious lifestyle. So I'm for autonomy. I want parents to be more involved. I want teachers and principals to be more creative and to feel that the system supports them. I'm not willing to privatize the Israeli public education system. Following that, I'm asking you to acknowledge that the major issue with the Israeli schools is not about autonomy and not about how creative the core curriculum studies are. The average investment in the OECD countries in the elementary school years is around $9,000 American dollars per student annually. Those are the numbers, not the top of the list, the average among the OECD countries. In Israel, it is less than 5,500. Okay? Now, there is a good explanation. We have many more kids in Israel than in other Western countries, but this is not a good justification. It's a good explanation, but it's not a good justification because you understand that once this gap is there, we can bring the most creative models of education from Denmark and from Australia. It doesn't matter. The public investment in each one of our children is much lower than the average in Western countries. And in that regard, we need to understand that if we want to protect the egalitarian nature of our education system, the solution is not to ask parents to pay more. The solution is to invest more by the government. And we strongly believe that if you invest money in strategic causes, not in sectorial causes, not in strange projects, if you don't give up your natural resources for nothing, like we did with the natural gas reserves that were discovered, if we run our civil service in an efficient manner, if we set priorities, then it is okay to invest money, okay, even if you create a national deficit, because this is an investment. And the same way we take loans to buy an apartment or to open a new business, it's okay that the government is taking calculated risks in order to invest in the next generations of the Israeli society. So please, please, please keep in mind, most newcomers from North America and European countries are part of the Israeli middle class. Right? And in that regard, it's easy for us to talk usually about the curriculum in the schools of our children or the environment in the schools. But this is not the major problem with the Israeli school system. The government investment.
I actually want to give Marcy a chance to jump in here. She actually has a background in Jewish education, and I think that she has a follow-up, but I would ask if we could keep it to just a minute because I know that we are short on time.
Sure.
Like I said, rabbis, I wanted just to say that rabbis from all denominations share one thing: we give long answers to short questions. So I apologize for that.
We're happy to have
behave in a better manner.
Go ahead, Marcy.
It's important to have common ground there. So my question will stay very focused in the area that you were speaking about. And the question is structural changes and system investments that you started to speak about. To me, I've heard a lot of families talk about this rare opportunity as classes went back in part, but not in total, that their children learned in classes of fewer than 35 students for maybe the first time. And that experience was powerful for a lot of students. They were able to experience learning in a classroom of 15 or 20. It made a very big difference. I think about that, and I think about the fact that with all the adoration in the world that's pouring out on teachers, salaries are where they are. So those are two areas that I think about. And I'm wondering, as you look at systematic investment and structural change, what does it look like for you?
So look, again, I'm not against in trying and implementing new models of teaching. I think that the pandemic, again, created a huge challenge, but also opportunities. I want us all to remember that Israel has the miserable leading score in the number of days that our schools were closed. Now, if this strange policy would have prevented 6,000 casualties, okay, maybe for pikuach nefesh, this is something we need to do. But to have 6,000 casualties in this pandemic, and at the same time to be in a situation that our kids stayed at home much more than any other kids in other countries that dealt with the pandemic, again, this is another symbol of the total failure of the Israeli government to deal with the pandemic, and the leading ministry in this dark list is the Ministry of Education. Basically, nothing happened during 12 months. They didn't come up with any more sophisticated solution. Can you hear me? I'm not losing you?
Yeah, we have you.
I'm saying that it's amazing to see how from one lockdown to another lockdown, basically the Ministry of Education learned nothing. Learned nothing, didn't come with any more creative solution. And friends, it's all a result of lack of leadership and good management. Okay, now, again, I do think we need to be wiser in the way we teach. I think it is clear that there is no reason why students should study 6 days a week and not 5 days a week. There is no use. It is quite clear that we need to maintain some long learning techniques. But as you said, the main issue in Israel is the number of students in the classes. There is no result to this challenge rather than having more teachers and building more classrooms. Right? There is no magic solution to the quality of education unless we minimize the number of students in the classes. You can't minimize the number of students in the classes unless you build more rooms and you train more teachers. And in order to train more teachers, you need to pay them better. Now, again, I know that I keep coming with solutions that cost money. So I'm not suggesting that everything can be implemented immediately. But right now, it's not about the timeline. Right now, it's about the basic philosophy. Do we have a government that says that in a 10 years plan, we want to reach this number of students in the classes? And unfortunately, we are not there.
Okay, thank you for that. We would like to move a little bit farther away from those issues now and focus a little bit more on some of our Olim audience, because many of our members are Olim, and a lot of us still have family living all over the world. We have seen a growing divide between Israeli and diaspora Jews. Many in the diaspora feel disconnected to the country, and they feel that Israel should be a homeland to all Jews. Therefore, their values should be reflected in the way matters concerning all Jews are handled. Can you share your thoughts on this issue and whether you think we are doing enough to address it? And in addition, on the same note, what more can we do to encourage and facilitate and assist with Aliyah for those that do come?
So when we're talking about Israel-diaspora relations, I will not surprise you when I suggest that nothing truly can be done in that arena if Israel doesn't respect its own definition of the nation state of the entire Jewish people. And right now, Israel is failing to meet this Zionist ideal because Israel is occupied by the fake thought that we have first-class Jews and second-class Jews and third-class Jews. And till the state of Israel doesn't fully recognize all streams of Judaism, all Jewish denominations, there is nothing to talk about in regard to improving the relations between diaspora communities and the state of Israel. Now, it's nice that the Netanyahu government is pouring money, not a lot of money, but pouring money to the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. It's wonderful that we have Masa in Taglit. But you know, I'm not suggesting that religious pluralism and Jewish diversity is all we need. But this is a necessary condition in order to build relations. And this is the base of the dialogue. And in that regard, it's very nice that we have an ultra-Orthodox woman as the Ministry of Diaspora. And I always love to hear Naftali Bennett talks about the fact that his parents grew up in a conservative shul, and that Bezalel Smotrich, who is calling to boycott the reform movement in Israel, is willing to say that maybe in diaspora communities, conservative Jews and reform Jews have a role to play. But look, this is Babkes, if we can use Yiddish here. Unless the state of Israel, again, fully respect the fact that there are different ways to be Jewish in the diaspora, but also in Israel, we will not be able to recover the relations. I don't think that the issue of the Western Wall and the egalitarian, the Kotel Agreement is the most important element in the relations with the diaspora, but this is also only a symbol to the bad behavior of the current Israeli political leadership. And it's quite clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu preferred his evangelistic friends in North America over millions of reform, conservative, and unaffiliated progressive Jews. We need to promote freedom of religion and conscience. We need to end the Orthodox monopoly over marriage and divorce and in other fields of Jewish life. Again, it doesn't mean that this is the only cue. We need to invest more in the dialogue between Israel and diaspora communities. We need to invest more in important projects like Masa and Taglit and others. And you refer to the Olim community. I strongly believe that the Olim community from Western countries are one of the most important bridges or mediators between the different communities. Israel should encourage a new aliyah from Western countries. We need to help young Jewish families from all denominations and communities to come to Israel and to root their life in Israel, not because there is no future for Jewish life outside Israel. My Zionist philosophy is different. And I strongly believe that Jewish life will continue for many generations in many parts of the world. But I strongly believe that by bringing more Olim from North America, from Europe, from Australia, from other parts of the world, will help us to build richer Jewish dialogue with diaspora communities, and definitely the Labour Party sees it as a top priority.
So I know that we don't have a lot of time and that you have another event to go to. So I do want to finish with one question because it's something that you've brought up yourself a few times, and I think that it's important to address. We know that the courts recently decided that reform and conservative conversions in Israel should be recognized as accounts towards citizenship issues. And I know that that decision was celebrated by you and Labor, but at the same time, it was met with, in the nicest way, we can call it great opposition from the Haredi parties. And on the flip side of that, or a different piece of that, you mentioned Avigdor Lieberman, the head of Yisrael Beitenu. He even just this week was shown to be expressing some real animosity towards the Haredi parties, and it made some.
He had good teachers among the Haredi politicians.
We don't have to go into the specifics of what he said, but there's clearly some very heated feelings about the Haredi parties right now, and even more so since the lockdowns. Based on the polls, though, both Labor, your party, and the Haredi parties will be sitting in Knesset. Do you see any way for your parties to work together, and is there any room for coexistence and cooperation between them?
Look, first of all, the answer is definitely yes. Okay, the Labour Party is not in the business of boycotting any Israeli community, by definition. Okay? The history of the Labour Party shows that in the past we worked with the Haredi community. We did it recently. I think we are committed to do it. We have a very strong desire to be the political hub of most of the Israeli sectors and communities, Jews and non-Jews, Orthodox and secular, liberal, religious Israelis, and all different communities, okay? But it must be built on trust, transparency, and good faith. By definition, the Labour Party will not be able to implement 100% of its policies if we are part of a coalition. But we are not willing to be in a place that when it comes to Judaism, and when it comes to religious freedom in Israel, we need to hand everything to the ultra-Orthodox parties. If they are willing to create wise, sophisticated compromises, we are there. We did it. Now I'm saying we as the reform movement. We did it with the Kotel. We did it with the Kotel. We had a signed compromise agreement. The ultra-Orthodox parties failed to follow it. So if it's about building wise compromises, definitely we are able to work with Haredi parties. There is a reason why we are not using any incitement campaigns, any campaigns with rough statements. Again, you're talking about Lieberman. Believe me, what I'm hearing from my Haredi brothers and sisters, their promises to boycott me, not to say to me shalom in the corridors of the Knesset. I need to say there are enough Knesset members that will say to me shalom. I'm not deeply disturbed by that. But the incitement of the Haredi parties against millions of conservative and reform Jews, it's definitely a red line that should not be crossed, the same way that Lieberman should not cross similar red lines. We are not Lieberman, we are not the Haredi. We want to be the party of all Israelis, and at the same time to promote our values. And we are committed in that regard, I need to say, because I don't want you not to know if you consider to vote Labor. We believe in religious freedom. We believe in the values of the Declaration of Independence. We believe that promoting civil marriage and divorce in Israel do not only support the democratic values of Israel, it will support Israeli Judaism. It will enable many, many non-Orthodox Israelis to feel that Judaism is a source of inspiration and not a source of political bad priorities and someone telling them how to live their Jewish life. So it's also, there is a Zionist benefit and a Jewish benefit to having an open market of Judaism here in the Jewish state.
Great, thank you so much, Rabbi Kariv. And I know that you have another event now, but if you are able to, can you just sum up and even just one sentence? And
now it's my turn to ask question.
To me?
There is one topic that you didn't mention.
I had a lot of topics I wanted to mention.
No. There is one. You addressed social policies. We talked about religion and state. I think that you can understand where I stand in regard to the independence of the Israeli Supreme Court, if I'm a progressive Jew. There is one word that was not mentioned in our interview. Palestinians.
You know, you're making a very fair point. We did want to focus on more internal policy.
No, it's okay.
Right, do you want to add something? I'd be happy to hear.
There is a reason why I whispered.
I'd be happy to hear if you have.
So I'll say the following. I'm not surprised you didn't raise the issue, and I'll tell you why. The current Israeli government, which is a unity government, a government that includes also people that present themselves to be central leftists. This is the first party in the last almost 30 years that didn't mention the word Palestinians or the Palestinian Authority in its guidelines that were presented in the Knesset a year ago. And this is the result of, again, a directed effort. It's not a surprise. It's not a coincidence. This is a result of a political philosophy and political policy that is trying to convince all of us that we can ignore the elephant in the room. That because we are celebrating an American embassy in Jerusalem, and because we celebrate a peace agreement with the Emirates and a new agreement with Morocco, we can ignore the fact that there are 4 million Palestinians living aside to us, sometimes among us, and they definitely don't live aside their national aspirations. Now, I don't know how many of you were here in Israel during the 80s. Some of you were not born in the 80s, but many of you were not here during the 80s. I was a teenager when the first Intifada started. And I well remember, first, how surprised we were. And second, the false thought that, it will end in a week. Yitzhak Rabin, the late Yitzhak Rabin said, give me 12 days and everything will be quiet again. Okay? And why I'm saying it? Because in the end, there is no way to promote all the good things we addressed in the last 60 minutes without understanding that we need to separate ourselves from the Palestinians. That a Western, strong, vibrant country, which is a democracy, cannot control the life of millions of people that are not integrated in your society and do not enjoy the basic civil rights of a democracy. Now, I'm not suggesting that tomorrow we will have a peace agreement with the Palestinians. And maybe the sad truth is that it will take us another generation. But there is no status quo. There are political forces in Israel that are trying to set facts on ground and to prevent any future solution of two states. There are today forces in the Palestinian society that are saying, we don't have a reason to move forward. We'll wait. There will be a demographic equality between the river and the sea. And then everything is open and we'll have one state instead of two states. And in 100 years, we'll be the majority. Those that don't understand, we need to create a separation between a Jewish state with a strong Jewish majority and full equality to the minorities, but again, a nation state of the Jewish people, and to enable millions of Palestinians to enjoy self-determination, go against the nature of Zionism and the future of Zionism. And we have a political side who is occupied with legislating a nation state basic law as if it really creates any important actual thing, and at the same time are actually creating a binational reality here in Eretz Israel that is going directly against the Zionist nature of Israel and its democratic nature. So if we want to secure good future to our children and grandchildren, we cannot ignore this elephant in the room.
Thank you so much for that. And I know that you felt strongly about adding that, and I appreciate your contribution to that discussion. There's a lot of things that I wish we could talk more about, and we had to be limited, and so we did our best. So I do appreciate your adding that. So thank you very much, Rabbi Kariv of the Labor Party.
Go and vote.
Will do.
Go
Thank
and
you
vote.
so much.
Thank you for joining.
Pesach Sameach.
And Pesach Sameach, yes.
There is a holiday around the corner. Enjoy Pesach, have a healthy, meaningful, kosher, if you keep kosher, joyful with the family, with friends, and really, Chag Sameach, Chag Aviv Sameach.
Amen. Chag Sameach.
Toda, chaverim.
And thank you all. Thank you, Marcy, for joining me, and thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to follow the Kerem House and Israeli Politics Simplified pages on Facebook to hear more about upcoming events in the Poli-Talks series. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And yeah, Kerem House page, stay tuned. We will continue to interview politicians. We hope to spend time with people and understand a few things in the structure of what are the priorities for this person, what are the visions for these areas, and is there a strategy? How are we going to get there? So thank you for hosting this one, Meira.
Thanks, Marcy. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.